Every year on the first Sunday of Advent, as Ruth reminded us when she lit our first Advent candle at the start of this service, we remember the patriarchs. But who were they? There were three in Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, or in Hebrew, that's Abraham, Yitzhak and Yaakov. They, like us, were followers of God, the one true living God, to whom they were faithful, despite, like us, being surrounded by many temptations. So a question, how long ago did they live? Answer, impossible to say. So let's just say a long time ago. And question, what did they do? Answer, they appear to have been nomadic, and they seem to have lived in probably large, comfortable tents, going from place to place, finding food and water for their herds. They seem to be quite well off from what it says in the Bible. So question, if they lived in an unknown period in the past, how do we know about them? The answer is through storytelling. In the evenings after the day's work was done, stories would be told, and these stories would develop about Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, the founders of the Jewish faith. And these stories would be passed through the generations until one day somebody wrote them down in what we call the Book of Genesis. And Christianity, Judaism and Islam all trace their faiths back to Abraham. So question, what can we learn from them? Well, in this short talk, I can't cover everything, so I've been selective. One thing from each patriarch, Abraham. Now it says in Genesis chapter 18 that Abraham was sitting by the great trees of Mamre when three men appeared to him. They were angels, messengers of God. The word angel means messenger, which is interesting, for are we not all messengers of God? And the angels tell him that he and his wife Sarah are to have a child. But the key point of the story to me is that when Abraham woke up that morning, he did not know he was going to meet a messenger of God. The point being, and something we can learn from Abraham, is you never know. We never know when we're going to meet a messenger of God. And from the story of the patriarch Isaac, I have chosen the well-known story of Abraham's attempt to sacrifice Isaac to God, which to us sounds absolutely crazy. A bit of trivia first though. The name Isaac means to laugh, because when the messengers of God told Abraham that Sarah would have a child, Sarah overheard and Sarah laughed. The lesson being, always trust God, even when it seems ridiculous. Now the attempt to sacrifice of Isaac. The people in those times lived in harsh conditions, no national health service, high infant mortality, giving birth very, very dangerous for a woman. And it was not uncommon in those times for a firstborn child to be sacrificed in order, it was thought, to gain God's favour, so he would save your future children. You give up one to save a lot more, was the idea. And this is what Abraham is doing. In effect, he is misunderstanding God. So God stops him. And this is a key moment in Abraham understanding that God does not expect sacrifice. God has no need of it. Or as the prophet Isaiah would say later, I desire justice, not sacrifice. Abraham is beginning to understand that God is a personal, loving God. And that's our lesson from the story of Isaac. God is a loving, personal God who doesn't wish to harm us. From Jacob, a lovely story. Jacob fell in love with Rachel, the daughter of Laban. And Laban said to Jacob, "You may marry my daughter Rachel, but first you must work for me for 7 years." He must have been in love, because he does work for 7 years. But on the wedding day, the bride is veiled, and sneaky Laban substitutes his older daughter Leah. Jacob marries the wrong person. It's never a good idea to marry the wrong person. So he has to work another 7 years for Laban before he can marry Rachel. In those days, you could have more than one wife. Now, I've been to a couple of Jewish weddings, and there's a tradition that goes back all the way to the story of Jacob. Before each wedding, the bride and her father sit in the room together, and the groom goes up and he removes his future wife's veil to check is marrying the right person. I love that tradition. What do we learn from this? Traditions are okay. Traditions are fun, as long as they don't get between us and God. So something from each of the 3 patriarchs. But before I recap, one last question. Where are the matriarchs? And they are there, and they're just as important. For Abraham there is Sarah, for Isaac there's Rebekah, for Jacob, as we've heard, there's Rachel and there's Leah. Do not underestimate how strong these women were. And there are examples from the ancient world of women rulers, strong ones. If you want a non-biblical example, look up the royal graves of that's U-R, for an example. Or in the Bible, look up the story of Deborah in the book of Judges, or the story of Jezebel. She gets a bad press, but she's a strong woman from the ancient world. Or even, how about Mary, Mother of God? Our faith has been patriarchal, but without the matriarchs, the patriarchs would have been nothing at all. To recap, Abraham, you never know when you might meet a messenger of God. Isaac means to love, because Sarah thought God's promise was ridiculous. So always trust God, even when it seems ridiculous. And God never wishes us harm. And from Jacob, traditions are fun, as long as they don't get between you and God. And never write off a matriarch. Have a peaceful and thoughtful Advent. Amen.